Good afternoon to you. Mark Sutton, HurricaneTrack.com here with your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. Tuesday, April the 9th, 2019. Hope your week is going well. I just got back from the National Tropical Weather Conference late last night. Actually, I was a day later getting back than I had intended to be because of severe weather, flight cancellations, and so forth. So I had a little extra time in Houston. It was a great conference. It had record attendance, including a couple of our Patreon supporters. A couple of our patrons came up. Brent from St. John and Joe from Maryland came. And it's funny because Brent, who was the farthest away, right, of all three of us, between myself, Brent, and Joe, Brent got home first. We all left at generally the same time, the same day, and Brent beat us all home because of that severe weather. All right, we're all back where we need to be, which is good. Everybody is safe and sound. I'm going to talk about what we learned at the conference in next week's update, and we'll start getting towards preparedness and some other things because we're getting close to the hurricane season now, well inside of 60 days to go. And that means we really have to thinking about these kinds of things, getting ready. What does that mean? What are we getting ready for? Those are some questions that we need to answer and address in the coming days and weeks. Okay, first of all, the Southern Oscillation Index. Remember that this is a real good metric that I like to use to help us understand the pressure pattern in the tropical Pacific. And when it is consistently negative, we typically are in that El Nino pattern. And when it's consistently positive, and the stronger positive or negative that it goes, the more amplified those phenomena, whether El Nino or La Nina, tend to be. So a more positive SOI, especially in the long term, tends to promote more of an easterly trade wind pattern, and we get a La Nina type setup. So what do we have right now? Look at this. We had this amazing rise in the last several days here overall, and now the 30-day average is only negative 1.68. And the 90-day average is up to minus 5.46. Because look where we came from. February was negative 14, and March was down there at negative 6. So we were even just a little bit above the March average, and overall that index is going up, the Southern Oscillation Index. And so what does this mean? It means, generally speaking, for now, for about the last week or so, the atmosphere is not as conducive to creating those westerly winds across the tropical Pacific that leads to El Nino. Not saying the El Nino is coming to an end, but there's not currently a pattern in place to really continue to kickstart it. And the subsurface map here, it's not really a map, it's an animation that I have locked in on the very last frame here. This really helps to tell the story. This was updated on April the 3rd. We'll get a new update from this by the time we do this weekly discussion next week. And what this is showing me, yes, there's still a very large area just below the surface here across a vast portion of the Pacific. We're talking thousands of miles where the water temperatures are warmer than average. And you have this large island down, it's like an island of cold or warmth. It's not a literal island, but a large, almost continent-sized area of anomalous warmth, and then a fairly large area also of warmth a little further below there, below about 100 meters or so. So what does all of this mean? Well, basically, when I see this, it is certainly lending credence to, well, we've got to dissipate all this heat down here relative to average. Remember, these are anomalies. These are temperatures that are relative to the long-term average, and we call that an anomaly. So the blues are your colder anomalies over here, and any of these other colors on the right-hand side of the scale are your warmer or positive anomalies. And so again, the thing that intrigues me, we really don't have anything building back over here that looks like this area. The SOI being positive, part of that certainly due to a cyclone down there, I believe its name is Wallace, within the vicinity of where some of those pressure measurements get taken near Australia. Maybe that's skewing it a little bit, but we don't see that long-term average over the last 30 to 90 days really being substantially negative. I say long-term, definitely compared to a daily. What was today's count? It was like 17 or something. Yeah, today's tally is 17. So, we're definitely in the positive territory. You can see how things have gone up overall. How long this lasts, we'll just have to wait and see. Different models indicate the pressure patterns across the tropical Pacific will change after Cyclone Wallace moves out. We'll just wait and see. But for now, definitely the brakes seem to be put temporarily, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen down the road on this El Nino that has grown. It just doesn't look like it's going to do a lot more from here. And I can show you some of my reasoning behind that. All right, so let's first take a look. We go from the subsurface here to the surface map here. So this was the anomaly map, the NOAA NESDIS version updated yesterday. And here's the region that we're talking about, way out here in the tropical Pacific. And you can see all along the surface here, it does look warmer than average, but there's no large spike like on the right-hand side. And I'll show you. Let's just go back to 2015 real quick, okay? Let me outline this. 2015 was the last substantial El Nino that we had in the Pacific. Well, where else would it be, right? And let's look literally 4 years ago, okay? So almost the exact same time 4 years ago, the Pacific was definitely warmer, not only in the equatorial region, which I've outlined in the box, but also way up along the North Pacific as well, well to the north of the equator, especially right off the coast of Mexico here. And they were seeing a lot of impacts to marine life, the mammal population, marine mammals, off the coast of Southern California at this time. My good friend and colleague at the Georgia Aquarium has been talking to me about that ever since the 2015 season. I met him in 2016. And they're just these kinds of indications. We look at this year, water temperatures right off California, the Baja included, down in Mexico, just slightly above the long-term average. Nothing like we saw in that area back in 2015. And I know each year is different, and no two El Ninos are going to be the same. And we certainly do have warming this year, but it's just right there at El Nino. You know what I mean? It's weak. It's not an overwhelming signal. So I'm really eager as we go through time over the next few weeks here to take a look at this map and to continue to compare each time we do this with the past. So a week from now, around April 15th, that'll be the next weekly update. Let's pull this map up and also compare it to that same time 4 years ago, the last time a comparable subsurface warming event was going on, and just continue to see how close of a match, if at all, are we in fact having. And right now, it's not that close of a match. Definitely a much warmer overall Pacific. And so we'll just, that's what I really like about this. You've heard me long enough now to know, for those of you that have followed even the last year, being able to look at these tools is a gift, and that they're out there on the internet is fantastic. All right, also, speaking of anomalies, the Atlantic Basin here, slightly below average in areas. I mean, it's really right where it should be. We don't have any large pools. I mean, come on. Look at what it was like 4 years ago. A marked difference in the eastern tropical Atlantic back in 2015. And so this year it is definitely warmer than it was back then when we were looking at the same time frame. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And, really, it's April, right? None of this really matters yet. But the overall look to the Atlantic is kind of like right where you'd expect it to be. Not overwhelmingly warm even up here where some of these positive anomalies in the subtropics are showing up. We don't have anything really burdening the system, so to speak. So let's just wait. We'll keep going week after week until we get to the hurricane season. And even then, looking at it once a week, probably every Monday, makes sense. And we shall see how things progress. All right, let's get rid of a couple of these tabs here. All right, so the actual sea surface temperatures This is the Gulf of Mexico, South Padre Island, Port Isabel area, right down there. That's where we were for the conference. I did not go in the ocean. I stayed about 50 yards away from it. It just looked a little chilly to me. It was pretty windy down there. But I saw a couple of pictures from iCyclone, Josh Morgerman. Actually, one of them was a really great picture, I thought. It was just really neat, where he was out in the Gulf there. Water temperatures down there in that real close to the shore, probably low 70s, I would venture to guess, 72, 73. I really want to see 82 to 83 before Mark goes in the water. Josh is from Southern California. Water temperatures off of California are usually in the upper 60s if they're lucky, maybe 70s during the summer, and so maybe he's used to that. I don't know. But that was a great picture. If you follow Josh on Twitter, you probably saw it. I even complimented him. Hey, man, you can take your phone out in the water with a case or a little baggie, take some great pictures. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was going commando with his phone, so to speak, and taking a risk there in the Gulf. But overall, though, and what I'm getting at, water temperatures are coming up, especially the shelf waters all along the area. It looks like it tries to heat up from south to north here, but usually the Gulf starts to just fill in everywhere as we get closer and closer to June. And if we back out and look at the wider shot, there's your 26 degrees Celsius isotherm right through here, and you see it speckled with some 27s in there. The western part of the Gulf of Mexico down into the Bay of Campeche also filling in pretty nicely as warmer and warmer ocean temperatures start to take over. Sun angle's getting higher. We're getting further along in the spring, and that's just something we would expect to see. And it was mentioned, too, numerous times at the conference regarding seasonal forecasts, which I'll get to in a moment. The Gulf of Mexico is always warm enough for terrible hurricanes, whether you're talking about intensity or even Category 1s. Category 1s can be terrible, right, folks that survived and went through Florence? Yes, they can. All right, off the Atlantic coast, again, with the exception of that nor'easter that formed last week right when I left and went up here pretty far off the coast like that, roughly. That was it. We had no major nor'easters, no big blizzards from the coastal storms. Big fat zero this year of any significance. I don't remember. I certainly didn't go out for any. And I've kind of enjoyed going up and checking out some of these storms up here, these coastal storms in New England and parts of the mid-Atlantic during the off season, but didn't get to do that this year. All right, so the water temperatures here warming up nicely as well. Shelf waters still kind of chilly. There's your 26 Celsius isotherm, 25 Celsius through here. We're talking upper 70s to almost 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So here, too, things moving right along where we'd expect them to be. All right, so at the Tropical Weather Conference, and by the way, just again, tremendous effort by Alex and Tim and all of the people that helped them out. I cannot imagine what it takes to put something like that together. A lot of stress, a lot of things to coordinate, getting people in and out of Harlingen Airport, or coordinating all that, whether they fly down from Houston or they drive down like I did with Brent and Joe. Who knows, right? It takes a lot, and those guys did a great job, and we all really appreciate it. And here is where Dr. Klotzbach has released his forecast. It was back on Thursday. And you probably know all about this, but what I'm going to do is kind of compare this to some other forecasts that have also come out. And as we know, he's forecasting in his group 13 named storms. We'll highlight it here for you. 13, 5 of those named storms becoming hurricanes, 2 of those 5 hurricanes becoming major hurricanes with an accumulated cyclone energy of 80. That is kind of like saying, what are the Dallas Mavericks looking like this year? And you say, well, they got 13 players. I don't know how many teams, how many are on the roster of an NBA team, but just follow me here. You'll get it. And let me get me back in the picture so you can see some of my hand gestures here, all right? So you got 13 dudes on the team. 5 of them are really good. 2 of them are exceptional. And we're expecting their average score this year, if you have whatever it is, 100 and something games, 80 games, whatever they play. Maybe I'm not a sports guy except for Not the Carolina. I'm flipped. The Duke part. I don't really follow the NBA that much. I mean, why would I? They siphon off all of our good players. But point being, you've got what are they expected as their average score for the season when all is said and done? Hockey, football, whatever. It doesn't matter. Major League Baseball. You can look at the Cubs. You can look at the Braves. You look at their roster. How many are great players? How many are actual superstars? And we're expecting their average score to be, if it's baseball, 7 points per game. At least I got that right. You typically don't see high scores in baseball. And so we do the same thing with tropical activity. There is a score that all that wind and energy generates, and that's called accumulated cyclone energy. Last year, this number was anywhere from 125 to 129, depending on exactly who calculated it. And so that's kind of like, again, saying that the Dallas Mavericks or the Orlando Magic or whoever, their average score last year at the end of the season was 129 points. This year, they're only expecting to score 80. Maybe a couple of guys have become free agents and they're leaving and going somewhere else. That's what these numbers, for you sports folks out there, that's how you kind of look at it. So we're thinking 13. Well, that's what they're thinking. I don't really make predictions. I mean, I like the sub-seasonal stuff, and we worry about the impacts. But the public wants to know, what's the season going to be like? And so it's going to be just a hair below the long-term average, 1981 to 2010 average, which this needs to get updated too, because it's 2019, for goodness sakes. And as you can see, the ACE in that time period, I crossed it out, meant to highlight it, has been 106 this year, a good 26 points lower. And so that's kind of like taking out that one guy that could usually score 26 to 30 points per game. Does that make sense? I hope so. So that's what Colorado State is looking at. And Dr. Klotzbach citing the El Nino in the Pacific and the Atlantic Basin not as warm as it could be, so forth. Sort of the obvious parameters for April. But April has almost no skill, believe it or not. And I'm not going to criticize anyone, but I wonder how many years are going to go by of people making April forecasts that have very little to no skill, and there's no change, that they say we're not going to do that anymore, and you just start it in June. Whatever, That is a tough science, let's just say that, and I'm glad I don't have to worry about it. And at least here, this is from Tropical Storm Risk, and this is from Professor Mark Saunders and Dr. Adam Lee, and they're over there at the UK, at University College in London. Why do they care over there? Well, they have different folks that support them, and they provide this to the insurance industry and, of course, the general public, the meteorological community. And they are also predicting, generally speaking, a slightly below the long-term norm type of season. But I like this. They put it in, however, uncertainties in this outlook are large, and the forecast skill from early April is historically low. And I'm going to underline this one for you. And I'm going to add to that, it can also be, is that a word, also be? It can also be, it could be a contraction, right? It could also be historically bad, the prediction. Believe me, we've seen that before, and at least these folks acknowledge it. So, it's transparent. They're not hiding anything. So we'll see what these folks say in the future. So you got two that are slightly below, and then CFAN here, which is the Climate Forecast Applications Network. Who are they? We don't have time to get into that here. Google it. You got the world's knowledge at your fingertips. Google that, CFAN. And it's a nice, long technical report. And generally speaking, they are calling for a busier than average hurricane season, just slightly overall. And an ACE in the Atlantic, they're saying of 125. So that would be slightly above that 106 from the 1981 to 2010 average. And they're going from 2000 to 2018. So they have a longer, this is what I mean. There's different ways that people measure stuff. But nevertheless, they're looking at an ACE of 125 with 7 hurricanes. And they are predicting above normal total landfalls over the U.S. with 2 landfalls. So they're looking at some patterns in the atmosphere, and some of us discussed that at the National Tropical Weather Conference. I mean, we could talk about this for 2 hours, but I got to keep moving here. Basically, we think about the pattern that started in 2016 where we were able to get Matthew real close to the coast, and then finally making landfall there in South Carolina, just barely missing Florida by literally maybe 10 miles. That kind of pattern where you have the ridge in the western Atlantic and the trough, the mean trough position, that atmospheric low pressure area in the atmosphere where the jet stream buckles, that seems to have been pulled west several degrees of longitude over the last few years, especially in 17 when we had the likes coming off of Africa anyway, of Irma, of course, Maria making it all the way over to Puerto Rico. We didn't have these hurricanes turning out at 60 or 50 degrees of longitude. And then last year we had what we saw with Florence being able to make it all the way across. So it's not just the conditions in the Atlantic and the Pacific. How warm are the oceans? How favorable is the atmosphere for development? Dry air? Those kinds of things, La Nina versus El Nino, as important. Because remember, let's just look at Dr. Klotzbach and his team's forecast. 2 major hurricanes are what they predict. What if they're exactly right and there are exactly 2 major hurricanes, Category 3 or higher, and the pattern is favorable for them to hit the U.S. or to hit the Caribbean islands instead of, assuming they develop in the deep tropics, turning out in the middle part of the ocean. Michael certainly was not a deep tropical origin system. It developed in the Caribbean Sea. We had 4 days to get ready, so that's a different story. Same thing with Harvey. But Irma, Jose got close enough even after Irma, and then, of course, Maria for the Caribbean islands. And remember, this is not just a United States issue we're talking about here. So the CFAN folks indicating the possibility of 2 U.S. landfalls. Again, we'll see how this gets updated over time. All right, so that's a look at the 3. And there's others, but we got to move on, and I'll look at everything. Phil, Dr. Klotzbach here, has this great website where he has put together an aggregate of, and that's a fancy way of saying a compilation of all of the forecasts that are made from the reputable organizations. Some folks are just kind of, well, I'm making a forecast, and if I ever did a forecast, which I'm never going to do for the season ahead, it's just too hard, and what good would it do? Until I can tell you where they're going to hit and how bad it's going to be, I'm not getting in that game. So that's a big never. But, I wouldn't expect mine to be on there. I'm a geographer. I'm not a meteorologist. I'm an earth scientist, but I don't look at these parameters like they do. I'm interested in the impact. So he has come up with a site that lists all of them, and we'll take a look at that later on when the time is right. I think the first part of June, after more of the forecasts have come out. All right, I've rambled along on that issue long enough. It's still active in the spring, and we do cover lower 48 weather here on the weekly update because I want to keep people informed. And hey, hurricanes are cyclones, and these little L's that you see, there's one right there coming into Colorado today and out of Wyoming. An L, these are cyclones. These are cyclonic areas of low pressure, right? And these are cyclones, and the high pressure areas are anticyclones. You get good weather during those, and so it's kind of like maybe I'm the cyclone whisperer, trying to think what they're thinking and get ahead of it. And that'll help to keep you aware as well. Maybe I can brand that, cyclone whisperer. I don't know. Getting ahead of myself. Get a big head here, Mark. Keep moving, all right? So what does it look like? Well, today, not a bad day. If we could rewind it, I'd show you all the junk across the southeast here that caused all the weather delays. But what is it looking like out in time? Well, there's a nice, healthy, not going to be nice for impacts, but a very healthy storm system is going to develop here coming out of the Front Range into western Kansas. And you know this by now, I hope, looking at basic meteorology. And even in geography, you study meteorology, so I do have meteorological training, but my degree was not focused in the physics and the engineering side and the differential equations and all that of meteorology. But We all should know by now, all those isobars in there, those lines you see, isobars, lines of equal pressure, that's windy. That's a blizzard on the northwest side, Nebraska, eastern Colorado, southern South Dakota, maybe all of South Dakota when it's all said and done. A historic, not my words, National Weather Service saying historic storm for the Great Plains. Once again, this will lead to more flooding, an awful, awful situation. So please, if you're in this area, you know people in this area, they should be aware of it, but if they're not, let them know. Tell them, Mark said to pay attention, go to weather.gov. But I believe everybody up there, considering that it's the breadbasket of America and the agricultural interests, the tornado threats, the severe weather, you name it. I mean, they even get ex-hurricanes that go up through there. These are probably some of the most weather-aware people in the world in the heart of the nation's, in the midsection of the country, the heart of the nation. That's what I was trying to say. Big, big storm coming up for sure. And this moves on. This is about 54. Here's 3 days out, so that's 72 hours. Maybe some severe weather on the eastern side of it. We'll just have to wait and see, how that pans out. Again, really just want you to see this as a broad brush. Here's the weather over the next week or so. Please be aware of it. We're at 4 days out now. That lifts up into Canada. Now, let me bring me back up for a second. This is where sometimes doing something that's outside of our normal hurricane stuff helps us to see something that I just talked about. Remember when I said some of us were discussing the pattern in terms of landfalls, and that it looks like sort of the mean trough position, the average trough position, or where the jet stream buckles, has seemed to been pulled west over the last few years. Look at these storm tracks. Think about what I said, I'm going to use red here, about these nor'easters. Normally we see them come up the coast like this, or a disturbance will come out of the Midwest like that and track up the coast. And, we have a big storm track right here along the East Coast, with the potential of always having, every winter it seems the last several years until this winter, a big meeting of these storms kind of right there. That's your storm track. And these deep troughs that cut in along the East Coast, upper level energy, the warm ocean, etc., those baroclinic processes get involved, and you get these big time epic coastal storms. That's because the jet stream, that mean trough, and sometimes it's mean in the literal sense, like mean, and sometimes we're talking about the average position has been kind of over this way. I don't know exactly, and a lot of our hurricanes as of late have turned out before 2016. Remember that period? We had 12 years where no major hurricanes hit the United States, and then 3 years in a row, right? Or is it, no, 2 years, 17 and 18. So I'm kind of thinking that the look of these storms, my iPhone's sitting right over here and it blinked at me and distracted me. Most of these storms have gone like this year, just something like this. The average track seems to have been, I'll just draw a big arrow, like up through here, not this way. Does that mean something? We shall see. Because look what's just offshore. You can see it even on the surface map. There's the high pressure area in the western Atlantic. This is at the surface. So it's just got me thinking, and we talked about this as I alluded to, at the conference. Does this mean something? So we'll see. It's something to definitely keep an eye on. All right, moving on ahead. Again, this is 96 hours. Between day 4 and 5, eastern Texas, again, into Arkansas, Louisiana. You folks watch that, okay? It's going to show up on the severe weather parameters. I'm going to show you in a moment. Springtime, it gets into our heart of Dixie there by day 5, next Sunday. And then you're right towards tax day there. Look, once again, that low tracking this way instead of across and this way. Maybe I'm reading something into it that's not there, but that is a point that should be at least looked at, because during hurricane season, we get that strong ridge building this way like what brought Florence in, and you just never know. These things are going to start to matter over the next weeks and certainly months. Okay, so severe weather. We talked about that some on the analysis of the GFS there. This is your look in sort of thumbnail format, and I was smart enough this time to go ahead and pull them all up in their own tabs. The day 1 convective outlook, not too bad. Everything's generally green. So anybody with flights and so forth, air travel, I'm pretty sensitive to that since I got stuck in Houston for a day longer. Not too bad. And then day 2 tomorrow, again with that cyclone developing out here, east side of it, maybe some severe weather. And then the day 3 outlook, that moves up into portions of the upper Mississippi and Ohio valleys, more Ohio River Valley, Kentucky, southern part of the Great Lakes there, Lake Michigan. Then at days 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, not much on 4 through 8, but in the middle there, days 5 and 6, again down in the deep south towards the heart of Dixie, you got to pay attention. It is April, severe weather season cranking up. Warm, moist air comes up out of the Gulf. You get these storms that are cutting across, and somewhere in here you get this battle zone. So pay attention to that. All right, I'm done. We covered a lot. I really appreciate your time and attention. Do not forget, we're on Patreon, and we are building and have been building over the past, since really 2005, before internet, and, well, the internet was around, but not like we know it now, the social media, and Patreon, was all there. We were still building this, going all the way back then, almost, 14, 15 years ago. The modern version of it is remarkable in what we can do, and that's how we're mostly funded, through Patreon. So as we get closer to the season, if you want to become a supporter and get the benefits of being a patron, that's how you do it. Patreon.com/HurricaneTrack. I'm on Twitter at HurricaneTrack. And, of course, we have an app on Android and iOS. It's called Hurricane Impact. And if you can't find it for some reason, let me know. Send me an email from the YouTube channel there, and I'll make sure you find it. Again, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. We're getting close to the season, so we're going to pay attention to this stuff a lot more things to talk about going down the road from here, and we'll make sure we cover it all. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. We'll talk again next week.